Welcome to Starter TV. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Joining us today is Bill Kane, a highly accomplished global human resource veteran with over 30 years experience. Currently, he's Senior Vice President and General Manager of HR at Sumitomo Corporation of America. He's also a sought-after speaker and author. Bill, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You have been recognized as an organizational change expert. How did you achieve this recognition?
Well, I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked in some very challenging environments. I've worked with some very good people, some very solid leaders. And every organization I've worked in, it seems, and this is probably true for many people, you're trying to make it a better place to work. Early in my career, I worked for FMC Corporation in their chemicals division in one of their manufacturing sites. And it was a unionized environment, and I had responsibility for labor relations. And we were one of the first companies to try and introduce multi-trades. What I mean by that was that we wanted our employees to have multiple skills such that they could solve problems in the manufacturing site. And it was a different approach, and it wasn't welcomed by the unions at the time, but ultimately we were able to implement that on site. The next position I had was with a company that was literally in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and this was Concurrent Computer Corporation down the Jersey Shore. And it was the first company, actually in the state of New Jersey, that went before the court and petitioned to do our own turnaround. Prior to that, the court appointed trustees to oversee companies who were going through turnarounds or needed to get out of bankruptcy. In this case, we petitioned the court, we worked with an outside consulting firm, and we're actually able to turn that company around in 18 months, which at the time was seen as a pretty good track record. And my career since then has gone on to a variety of challenges, startups, strategic repositionings, turnarounds that I guess I've benefited from some of the scar tissue of 30 plus years of this.
Can you list some of the key elements involved in the process of change management?
Yeah, it all starts with leadership and having a good executive sponsor at the top. You need first and foremost, that common vision, that direction, that purpose. Where are we going and how do we get there? So we start with vision. The why are we here, the what are we trying to accomplish is the strategy, and ultimately the many strategic steps that support trying to make that direction happen. Then you drill down to the tactics, and that's where you start talking about not only organizational objectives, but you get people involved and what they could and should be doing to make sure what they are doing is aligned with the corporate goal overall.
Now, how do you implement change management at Sumitomo Corporation?
Sumitomo is a large company. We're actually a financial advisor, investment company. We own many different companies. In the Americas region, for which I'm responsible for the human resource activities, we own over 40 operating companies. And many of them are in different stages of their development. Some of them are startups, some of them are more mature. Mm-hmm. And I work with a lot of our operating companies and their various management teams to help support them through the various phases of change.
Now, how can HR build a collaborative culture in a world where business operations are spread across so many boundaries, and what pitfalls should be avoided?
So here's where I can point to the work I'm doing in Sumitomo and our corporate or our parent company. Now, Sumitomo is a Japanese headquartered company, and it's a very Japan-centric company. And there's recognition in the headquarters and certainly in the regional locations, such as New York, where I work, where we now recognize the need to have global talent, local talent, if you will, in many of our senior management roles. One of the projects that I'm helping to lead right now is the introduction, the customization, the harmonization, if you will, of our HR practices up and down our region, from Canada to South America. And technology is helping with that, to the extent that we can be as consistent as possible with our HR practices in how we select talent, attract talent, and ultimately motivate and develop that talent. Those are the practices that we're now working on that I find very exciting.
So, Bill, when and how do you know it's time to stimulate change in an organization, and what framework do you follow in order to implement that change?
That phrase that you sometimes hear in an organization, we've been doing it that way for 10 years, why would we want to change it? Or that's just the way it is. when you hear those words, certainly when I hear them, the hair on my back kind of raises a little bit. I think it's every leader's responsibility, every manager, every supervisor, doesn't matter your title. You're not there to babysit. We're here to make the organization better, to improve it. And that's really what change management is. It's the perpetual transformation of an organization, trying to make it better, take it from its current state to a better state tomorrow. And change management is something that I think is a competency that all leaders require. And I don't think it's particular to any one organization or any particular situation, though some of them are more dire than others. But I think it's incumbent upon every leader in an organization to push change, to ask that question: is there a better, a faster, a cheaper way to do things? Can we improve? Can we make it more effective? Can we make it more efficient? Those are kind of the basic questions, whatever you're doing, whether you're talking about getting a shipment out the door or a manufacturing issue or trying to solve a marketing question.
What's been the implications of IT on HR management in a generic sense?
IT, I believe, has totally transformed human resources. And let me give you a little bit of an analogy. In the 1990s and into this and beyond 2000, when you asked a CEO who their right-hand person was, you inevitably heard the answer CFO. Right. And then the question was, why is that? And that was because analytics, data, was available to the CFO. The finance function had figured out how to get real-time data, shipments, trends, invoices, accounts receivable, accounts payable, at the fingertips of the CFO and thus onto the CEO, so the CEO could make the best informed decisions possible for that business. HR historically had been a little bit art and a little bit science. And what analytics has done, what IT has done for HR, is to really put the science into it. There's HR technologies out there now like SuccessFactors, Oracle, Workday, that many companies are now embracing. And that brings big data to organizations. What I mean by that is I can now, at my fingertips, I know headcount. Now that may sound fairly simple, but in an organization as complex as Sumitomo, that used to be a spreadsheet and several days of cranking through and a lot of emails to come up with that. But now at our fingertips, it's headcount, it's analytics, it's turnover reports, it's diversity trends, it's looking at performance records of employees who have been there 5 years versus 15 years. All of this is now at our fingertips. And with that information, the workforce analytics, we can make better informed decisions about how to invest in our people, how to deploy our people, how to better manage talent.
All right, so there's HR analytics, which is now becoming the way forward in HR. And with HR professionals coming from varied backgrounds, how can they upskill themselves in this? And are there specific competencies that people should be looking towards?
Yeah, well, I'd probably first answer that, with an organizational adage. I remember the line where the CFO said to the CEO, speaking of if we invest in all these people and we leave, what's that mean? And the CEO responded by saying, what happens if we don't invest in these people and they stay? And I think, one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that we need learning organizations. And we as employees, and it doesn't matter, again, I'm not talking about a level or a title, I think we are all responsible for our all learning. And we need to stay current in our field. We need to stay current with technology. We need to know what's going on in our trends, our industry, the marketplaces we play in. If we're not keeping up, we're falling behind. And if we're falling behind personally, our organization's falling behind. So I'm a firm believer in investing in myself, a firm believer in investing in the people around me, and I want my organization to invest in our employees so we can improve.
Is big data a catalyst in developing new organizational competency models for better recruitment?
I think it is. And I base that answer on a lot of different research that's out there. We're introducing some new training programs at Sumitomo Corporation, for example. We've just put in a new grading structure, and we've organized all of our jobs into 3 or 4 different bands. There's support, professional, managerial, and executive. And there's some core courses that we want to offer for each of those bands, such that if you're a manager, for example, that you know how to manage conflict and manage performance and manage priorities. And I think we've identified 10 or 12 core courses that we want to make sure that you are competent. With that, you then look at the position. And here's where the research comes in. Whether you're the manager of accounts receivable, or you're a communications manager, or you're an HR manager, there's certain competencies or skills required for that particular position that you need to be proficient in. And research tells us more and more what those proficiencies are, such that in addition to the core training that you'll take as a manager, we whittle that down, and there's some specific training that you could be taking and should be taking to stay up to date.
Now, how has talent assessment and development undergone a change in the digital age, and can you share some examples of this?
So I think of, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but
I'm right there with you.
Okay, let's just call it the 80s, and performance management back then, if it existed, was largely done on the back of an envelope, and it was there was probably a standard form, and everybody completed it, and it was more of a paper exercise, frankly, than anything else, or at least it didn't have the value today that it has. Today, performance management, in my mind, it's interactive. It isn't an annual exercise as it was back in the 80s. This is something that could and should be going on almost on a daily basis. Feedback, interaction. There needs to be constant communication about that old Edge Koch question, how am I doing? Yeah. I mean, people want feedback. They deserve feedback. And I've seen far too often where managers are not comfortable giving feedback, and maybe that feedback's uncomfortable to give because it might be seen as critical or not constructive, when in fact people, I think, embrace and want that feedback because hopefully it makes them better. And if they're getting it in real time, it takes all of the anxiety away from that quarterly or 6-month or annual checkup, if you will, for performance management. And technology plays a big part of that as well, because, again, going back to the systems I was talking about earlier today, if everything's online, when you go online, you see your objectives, they're in front of you every day, and your manager is probably giving real-time feedback to you, or hopefully is. Peers may be giving input, and part of that 360-degree systems are far more popular today than they were back in the day. And thus you're getting, with more feedback, you can make better decisions about where you need to grow and develop going forward.
What are the different ways to analyze and measure the impact of HR analytics on your business?
Well, I think you probably start, Tracy, with some very basic metrics. Look at the cost side of people. Salary, benefit, turnover. The cost of turnover. I've done a lot of research over the years on talent management as a whole, and there are models out there that say turnover can cost as much as 5 times a person's annual salary when they leave. When you think about the disruption to the business, the void it causes, people who now need to have their own job expanded to fill in for the void, the cost of recruitment, the cost of training a new person. Turnover is certainly one of the larger costs around talent management that the technology today and the metrics today allow us to keep a much closer eye on, for example.
So, Bill, what are the different ways in which HR functions can effectively use social media for branding and recruiting purposes? And can you share some examples with us?
Sure. Every organization is unique. IBM is different from Pepsi, is different from Sumitomo, is different than the parent-teacher organization at your local school. And they have unique cultures, unique symbols, unique ways that we communicate. And social media, and I'm talking specifically now, I'll look at it from the internals, how we go out and recruit, how we present ourselves on a website, for example. Is it attractive to a potential client? What is attractive about it? The days of just looking at salary and benefits as the key decision makers for applicants or prospective candidates, I think those are long gone. Today, I think employees are far more interested in engagement. Where will they work where they can be productive, where it can be a satisfying work experience, where they can learn, where they can develop, where they can have a friend and some camaraderie. Those are the things that I think resonate today. And it starts with media, and it starts with even as your website. Is it warm? Is it friendly? Is it welcoming? What does that website say to the prospective candidate about potentially coming to work at your workplace?
Now, how often do you at Sumitomo suggest people update their websites, professional websites? Is that something that should be done every few years, every 6 months? Does that come into play?
I think that's something you want to do on a real-time basis. I mean, within Sumitomo, our employees keep employee profiles for us. And frankly, that's how we manage talent now. When we want to find a salesperson who has worked in the steel industry, specifically in automotive, who might speak Spanish, who might be able to help us with a particular business challenge in Mexico, I mean, that's a key search. And we hope that we'd be able to find that talent internally, or at least know if we have that talent internally, and then potentially look to that person to be able to help us in a situation where it might be required.
So, Bill, in a data-driven environment, what are some of the key aspects of good talent management strategy?
Oh, it's interesting. I'm a father of 3 boys, and one is out of college, one is in college, one's tail end of high school. And they're probably tired of hearing me say this, but it's a global world. And the competition they're going to have for jobs, maybe not today, although I think it is happening today, but certainly tomorrow, it's going to be global. And companies like a Sumitomo, a large employer, we have offices all over the world. And we now rely on our global talent management database, or will be relying on it as we further develop it. We're somewhat in our infancy right now, to find talent for the types of situations I mentioned a little bit earlier, where there might be a specific geography or a specific business challenge. The world is getting smaller, and technology is making that happen at a very fast pace. And I think it's incumbent for all active employees to continue to keep their internal resume fresh and up to date, such that they can help their respective organization move forward as needed.
How do you assess various candidates on their soft skills while hiring in leadership positions?
Well, there's a lot of different models that you can look at. Probably the first and foremost thing you look at is track record. Is this a person who has had success, however that gets defined in any given search? For me, I look at a few different things, though, personally. Communication skills, commitment, caring, team building and team leadership, very important. And I interview, as many people do, asking behavioral questions and try to drill down, what did you do? How did you do it? How did you interact when this happened? How did you respond when things didn't go as they perhaps were planned to go? I like resilience, flexibility. Those are kind of the key things that jump out at me.
What are the most important traits you evaluate while you're hiring on your own team?
Integrity. Human resources is a customer service driven organization. And I like to work with people who want to get things done, make a difference, have an impact on an organization. For me, the best HR professionals are visible, they're accessible, they're responsive. There's a lot of HR professionals out there who understand HR theory. They've got their background in psychology, organizational development, human motivation, and that's terrific. Those are the types of fields and backgrounds we want in the HR world. But I think the field gets whittled when we start talking about, okay, who can take that theory and practice and apply it in the workplace? My experience is that there are fewer and fewer people who have the hands-on skills to be out there and walk the shop floor, manage by wandering around, be in touch with the client groups that they represent, keep a pulse on the workplace. You need to do that in HR. A lot of people, I think, are comfortable in the back office. HR needs to lead out front, and having not only the educational background experience, but being out there and applying it and walk the talk. That's so important.
How do you define organizational performance management?
Well, certainly at the macro level, when you're talking about a CEO, the CEO is being evaluated by a board of directors, and there's key performance indicators that are set at the beginning of every fiscal year that the CEO needs to make sure get inculcated throughout the organization and presumably aligned and get people motivated around it and hopefully achieved by the end of the fiscal year. So the big picture report card is fairly easy to determine a pass-fail. As those goals move further and further into the organization, as they cascade down, the CEO and then the chief operating officer, or all the other C-suite executives, if you will, they're responsible for their own metrics and making sure that they are contributing to the bigger picture. And ultimately, at the end of the fiscal year, I'm sure is the case in most companies, there's going to be some type of internal assessment, evaluation on how his or her respective team did against their key performance indicators. But the key here is alignment. Mm-hmm. You've got to have common direction, you've got to have common purpose, and the strategy and tactics need to be aligned so that at the end of the year you can do that assessment. And of course, when it comes to performance management, using the SMART acronym, when individuals sit down and set their goals and objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. That's kind of the format. We ask employees to put their objectives in, but that's also true of the company's objectives and strategy.
So what are some of the tools and techniques used to assess the gaps in organizational performance management? And please share some examples with us.
Let me speak about change management in that light. So change management specifically, often there's a new management team that's brought in, a new direction we're going in. Perhaps they've revised the business plan and we're going in this direction or fine-tuning our product line. There's at a point, and it's fairly early on in the process, you've got to do a talent management inventory. What do we have? What do we need? What's the gap? And it's that gap analysis that has to be addressed during any significant change management process. How do we solve the gap? And that can be done in a variety of ways. You may be able to bring in outside expertise. You may be able to train people who are internal to the company already. You may bring in consultants, contractors. There's, again, a variety of ways you can kind of come at something like that. At the end of the day, however, I think it's incumbent upon management to offer the current staff the opportunity to grow, to develop, to learn to the extent possible to meet the new business paradigm.
Now, how do you measure success of the changes implemented to address these gaps?
It's all quantifiable today. Success is measured by bottom line. And certainly at the big picture, or the large picture for the organization, organizational profitability, turnaround, whatever the metrics may be, and that's largely driven by the financial scorecard of the organization. The people side, it's getting there. Again, it used to be fairly qualitative. Mm-hmm. Gee, Tracy's great, she's done this, she's done that, she took on this much, her job expanded, she got this certification. All of that's very important. But we also need to look at it to the extent possible from a quantifiable view, which is to say Tracy's productivity has increased 10%, or Tracy's output in another area has to the extent that we can quantify, and that's why when we set goals we have that letter M in there for measurable. To the extent we can quantify progress, that's important. That's saying that which gets measured gets done. Mm-hmm. That's true at the organizational level. It's easier to measure perhaps in the big picture, but it's also very important at the individual level too.
And what's been the most challenging cultural differences when you're trying to implement talent management systems?
So I've been fortunate in my career. I've worked for a European headquartered organization, and now I work for a company that's headquartered in Tokyo. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Sumitomo is kind of just starting to go through its, I'll call it evolution toward being more of a global company. And it's fascinating working with people from multiple cultures. And I love it, frankly. I mean, it's a great learning experience for me. And difference in language, difference in symbols, difference in culture. I work very closely with a lot of Japanese management executive right now, and the different perspective, and I'm making a broad generalization, but nonetheless, the different perspectives when we talk about talent management and performance management that they bring to the table versus a more Western view, it's night and day. And it's my job, in many cases, to try to harmonize those views. In fact, one of my goals, frankly, is to take the best of what might be local practice in any given discipline, like performance management, and the best of the Japanese practices and try to integrate them to the extent possible. Communication is the hub of that. There's no question. That's the fundamental underpinning of anything and everything we're trying to do. And to that end, bringing views together, getting feedback, having open discussions, having training programs that do kind of bring the views together so we can hopefully have the best of whatever practice it is. That's what's important.
Okay, as we discussed earlier, Bill, we know Sumitomo is a massive multinational organization with a presence in over 66 countries. Now, are there any major differences from country to country that you see as far as the attributes that make a successful leader? And did anything really stand out or shock you about the findings?
To me, I've got the whole spectrum of leadership. I work in an organization that increasingly has senior management that is embracing a global view, that understands that you need to be culturally adept. And there are local managers, executives, who still embrace and hang on to very local customs and business practices. And it's interesting for me to watch these two different models, if you will, come together and collide from time to time. I won't mention specifics, but there's one particular manager I enjoy working with who's responsible for a small country in South America. And his perspective is his backyard is the most important. And anything outside of that, is kind of secondary. Right. And yet that's kind of the antithesis of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a Sumitomo community, a learning community in many ways, and introduce common talent management platforms throughout the company. And it's up to me, frankly, in that particular case, to give him compelling reasons, explain the what's in it for me and why should he care, about modifying his view to be more welcoming to regional or global HR practices.
What would be the top three things different cultures can learn from each other about successful leadership styles?
Well, first and foremost, I think, is to be open-minded. The example I just gave of the manager in South America, his perspective is kind of as we started this discussion, we've been doing it this way for 10 years or 20 years or probably a little longer than that. Why would we want to change? So I think having an open mind is critical for any leader. Secondly, having that vision. As a leader, you've got to be able to stand up and say, this is the direction we're headed. And it's got to be clear, and it's got to be concise, and it's got to be forward-thinking, and it's got to attract followers and motivate people. People want to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning and jump in the shower and get in the car, and this is why I'm going to work, that vision, that leader's vision. And a third thing I think would be commitment. Commitment to a cause. I get motivated because I believe I'm having an impact on my organization. And I'll do anything to make that happen. If it means jumping on an airplane in 10 minutes, I'll do that. If it means I've got to cancel, something to get to something, I'll do that. And I think, having that commitment about wanting to make a difference, making a difference, getting excited about it. So often, and I've seen this even written, we talk about leaders with passion. I don't think it's passion. I think it's love. Passion can be fleeting. Passion comes and goes. If you love what you do, I love what I do in human resources. I absolutely love it. It's the one function, and I was very fortunate in my career when I started with FMC. They were great about moving me around from function to function. I wore a lot of different hats early in my career. But I ended up in human resources, and the reason I did, and I've stayed there, is because I can have an impact. It's the one position where I believe across the board in a company that you have that holistic view and you can make an impact. You have to earn that impact. You have to earn that voice and hopefully even have a vote from time to time on how to manage talent in the organization. But if you do it right, you can be at that right hand with a right hand of the CEO right there with the CFO.
What will be some of the most sought after skills for employees in the next 5 to 10 years? What will they need to possess?
Technology, technology, technology. I'll give you a perfect case in point. Right now at Sumitomo Corporation, we're redesigning our healthcare benefits programs, as many companies are. We're trying to keep up with the latest of what's going on in Washington. And as we start to peel back the onion a little bit and look at some of the detail behind where we spend our money on, whether it's regular visits or catastrophic care or maternity case, wherever that money is being spent, we've had a hard time doing the deep dive into the analytics around this. And that's even working with one of the larger health insurance providers. What we need to do and what we're now doing is getting into the detail behind this. And we have to know trends when they're happening. We have to know costs on a marketplace basis. We have to keep track of what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on with our competitors. These are all things that we probably need to do a better job going forward. But that's just the impact of technology and benefits. Technology everywhere, what's called the Internet of Things. That concept just boggles my mind, how the internet, how technology is impacting so many different fields today at such a fast pace. Whether it's a drone making a delivery of a box or swallow this pill and it will take pictures of your body in medicine and healthcare. I think technology is probably the key for any of today's college graduates. Know how technology applies to your field and stay up with it.
Definitely technology is important, but what about the soft skills, people skills? Is that just going to go away in the future?
Oh, goodness. Thank you for bringing me back to that point. So often today, I see people have a harder and harder time communicating.
Right.
We hide behind email, we hide behind texting, face-to-face. So the company I work in, Sumitomo, face-to-face is so important. And I think that's a core value I actually believe in. You get so much more value sitting down, having a conversation, getting to know the persons with whom you're working, or perhaps selling to, or buying from, as the case may be, that those relationships are important. And they impact how you do business and probably how well you do business. And so basic communications, message sent, message received, that paradigm is universal, and that's not going away anytime soon. So to the extent soft skills, as we'll call them, particularly in the area of overall communications, that I think is going to become even more important going forward.
Because it's becoming so rare?
Something to that effect. And I think, we often in business talk about IQ and EQ, EQ being emotional intelligence. I have seen, and I'm sure many HR leaders can attest to this, I have seen so many people's careers derail because they didn't have the EQ. They just did not have the interpersonal skills, the communication skills, the leadership skills. And I can give you, as many HR people could, I'm sure, story after story, at the highest level of an organization where an individual didn't have the skills, the competencies, ignored them, but ultimately derailed their career. I can think of one particular example where I worked with a gentleman, Harvard MBA, one of the brightest people he ever could slice and dice a balance sheet like you've never seen. And yet it was almost painful to watch him communicate with people. He just did not have, he was very insecure and very uncomfortable in his own skin. And we tried to work with him and coach with him and get him to a different place, and I think we did get him to a different and better place. But having those presentation skills, if you want to be a leader, you've got to be comfortable in front of a crowd. And that takes some work. These are the types of skills that people are going to need going forward, clearly. So yes, I emphasize technology, but you're absolutely right. It has to be balanced with the soft side of things, and at least communications I probably underscore, put in bold, underline. That's probably one of, if not the most important skill.
Bill Kane from Sumitomo Corporation of America, thank you so much for talking with us today.
It's my pleasure, and enjoyed it a great deal. Thank you.
And that just about does it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.